Today I wanted to try out Lightroom's new super resolution mode and see, is it really worth your time? Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, essentially it's a tool which allows you to quadruple the resolution of your photos. But how much difference does this really make at the end of the day? Well, to find out, I have 4 different scenarios that I'm going to be taking this software through, and we're going to see whether this software makes any improvements at all. Now, another really interesting factor about this experiment is that depending where your photos are going to end up is very much going to determine how useful this software is to you at all. So as part of this little experiment, we're going to see whether we think these photos are good enough to go on Instagram, or whether you could even print them on a calendar, or if it does a really good job, then maybe even printing it large like this massive photo up behind me. But I thought the best thing to do would be to show you just how easy it is to now apply super resolution to your photos in the first place. Now, for all the photos that you're going to see in just a moment, I'm going to be doing the exact same process. So by following this and applying it to your photos, you're going to get the same sort of results. Now on this image, I've already processed it in terms of the editing and in terms of cropping. So you'll see that the original image has been cropped down to a much smaller image. So once I've finished my edit, I'm going to come down to the panels on the right hand side, scrolling all the way down to detail and simply clicking super resolution. Now what Lightroom's doing is it's now processing this image, and within, well, it says 8 seconds, but it's never about 8 seconds. But, you know, 10 to 20 seconds, pretty quick. It's going to produce an image which is now increased in resolution. So as you can see, the process of this is really easy, but just how much difference is it making to our images? So I wanted to start with this picture right here. This is a shoveler duck. And as you can see, this is a very common scenario that we're getting in wildlife photography, and that is that the animal is just too far away. I shot this down in a hide in Oxfordshire, and obviously I don't really fancy going swimming in any of these lakes anytime soon, so this is as close as I could get on the day of this shoveler duck. And this is that original image when it's initially cropped. As you can see, obviously we can fill the frame, but there's not a lot of detail in our duck as it currently stands. So let's see just how much super resolution has been able to enhance this image. Now, I'll be honest, looking at these photos initially in a very wide view like this, I can't see a whole lot of difference. However, let's try and zoom in and see if we can see any more fine details as we zoom in. Right, so this is me trying to get them as close to being the same sort of size as possible here. As you can see, actually there is more detail on the photo on the left. So this is the image that we've put through the super resolution. As you can see, there has actually been able to get a bit more detail out of the image. However, it also looks a little bit noisier than this image here, but in a pinch, I think it's quite a good result. So actually what I ended up doing with this image is I run a little bit of denoise and a little bit of sharpening. Now, the interesting thing to talk about with denoise when it comes to Lightroom is that when you're using super resolution, you actually can't use the AI denoise features. This means you have to go back to the good old-fashioned manual settings. So if I go up back into Lightroom right here, you'll see when I've clicked super resolution, I now can't click denoise at all. So what I would end up doing is just manually reducing the noise using these sliders right here. And that ended up with a photo which looks like this. So as you can see, we've manually reduced some of that noise and sharpened it just a little bit in post. Obviously, it's not the sharpest image in the world, but if we look back to where we started, I think it's done really kind of pretty decent sort of job, to be honest. But just how much resolution have we been able to retain? So this image on the right is currently a resolution of 1250 by 883. Now, if we compare this to the resolution of Instagram, which would be 1920 by 1080, if we're doing a vertical, the whole screen of your phone, then clearly this has less resolution than that. So if this was, for example, a picture that I wanted to put in full screen on Instagram, it's going to lose a little bit of detail when it's been put onto that platform. However, if I compare that to the super resolution version, the super resolution version has a resolution of 2499 by 1666. Okay, so this is more than the resolution of Instagram, which is nice. It means that when I post to Instagram, this is the photo that's going to very closely come out. Obviously, there might be some compression and really nerdy stuff, but this is going to be a far closer representation when I put it on Instagram versus this on the right. So obviously, in cases where you are having to crop in a lot further, super resolution is going to be really useful when it comes to posting on Instagram. Now, if we're looking at larger print formats, such as even an A4 calendar. I worked this out as being 3,500 by 2,500. So our picture, when it's been massively cropped like this, is probably not going to be enough to print onto something like the calendar. But considering the sort of small starting point, I think it's done pretty well. And it's been able to salvage the photo at least good enough for Instagram. And I think in a pinch, if it was the only photo that you got of, say, I don't know, the Loch Ness Monster that was miles away, I think you'd settle for it at the end of the day. So I'd say it's pretty useful in this case, but obviously it's not going to set the world on fire. Let's move on to example number 2. Now, example number 2 is probably another thing that we need to think about when it comes to posting onto Instagram. In this case, what I was doing is I was shooting vertically, again for Instagram, and this composition right here would work really well on Instagram, where it's a vertical format. But if I wanted to post it portrait onto a platform such as onto YouTube, this is going to be pretty rubbish. It's only going to fill up the middle part of the frame, which you're probably seeing right now. So what I would have to end up doing is to crop this very, very heavily, removing all this detail and all this detail, and ending up with a photo which would look more like this. Obviously, in this case, the subjects are larger in the frame initially than the duck, which was very, very far away. And as such, we've come away with a higher resolution initially. This photo currently is 2,377 pixels by 1,558. This is going to sound like such a nerdy video doing all these stats, honestly. But what does that mean? It means that it's more than enough to post onto Instagram in this sort of way, as it currently stands, without having to use super resolution, and still not really lose any detail from this picture, which is great. But what about if I want to post it onto my calendar? Ding! Well, as we said earlier, the calendar has a resolution of 3,500 by 2,500. And as you can see, currently, this picture is not quite cutting the mustard. So once we've put it through super resolution, it quadruples that resolution, and we have ended up with a resolution of 4,673 by 3,115, which is more than enough if we wanted to use this on our A4 calendar, which is absolutely amazing to be able to go from something where it wouldn't be able to be posted to something that it would be able to be posted. But how much detail has it actually added to our photograph? Let's find out. Now, I've zoomed really heavily in here again, really trying to look at those fine details on the seals. This picture on the right here is our super resolution picture, whereas this on the left is our non-super resolution, our boring, lame resolution picture. Now, as you can see, when we really look at these fine details, it has done an absolutely incredible job, I'll be honest. So these whiskers, you've really done absolutely fantastically well, whereas it just looks a little bit more mushy on our original photo. If we were to think about posting this picture, we wouldn't still be able to reach a much higher resolution print like the 60 by 40 picture that you see behind me, but I think it's done really, really well. And considering it's a click of one button and 10 seconds to process it, and you come out with a lot more detail, not bad, eh? Now, when I was going through this process, I thought to myself, what other challenges might come up from processing these images through super resolution? And I alluded to one earlier, which is processing in terms of denoising our image. So I thought, does super resolution work well in very high noise scenarios? And this is something that you're going to get a lot of the time when you're shooting wildlife. So I found one right here. This is a lovely picture of a little muntjac shot at 12,800 ISO. Gone through all the usual processing as before, but as you can see when we zoom in, it's really, really noisy. There's lots of color noise in here. Not something that you would probably see if you were just looking at it on Instagram, very wide like this. But if you were to print it out, it's going to look pretty grainy. So what I've done is I have put it through the super resolution as well. And then I've applied additional denoising to it. So again, we can see our original example here on the left, and then the denoised and super resolution example on the right. As you can see, there's more detail that we've been able to retain, even in a very high noise environment. And then the denoising has been really good in terms of removing especially that color noise. That seems to be kind of the issue here on this photo, which is really, really nice. Now, in terms of resolution, I hadn't had to crop this image much in the first place. So the original image is the full resolution of my sensor. So it's the Sony a7 III, if you were wondering in terms of all these photos so far. Being a 24 megapixel sensor, It's 6000 by 4000. However, once it's gone through super resolution, it goes absolutely through the roof, and we've ended up with a resolution of 12,000 by 8,000, which is absolutely phenomenal. And it's more than enough if I wanted to make a print of that sort of size, which would only need 5,000 by 3,750. And this means that I would have loads more leeway if I wanted to do any further alterations to this picture and crop it down even further, perhaps, before printing it out. I don't think I would, because it's quite a boring photo, but the point still stands. My point is, if I wanted to, I could. Now, the final thought I had was probably the most interesting of the bunch. What if I wasn't using my camera at all? What if I found an old photo that I took on my iPhone 5S, and that is this picture right here. As you can see when we zoom in, there's, it's pretty chunky. The best way to describe it. It is a very low resolution camera, having a resolution of just 3264 by 2448. And if I wanted to crop this photo in any way, perhaps to show more detail of this, detail is such a weird word to use for an iPhone, but more detail of the butterfly, then I'm going to end up with a photo with an even lower resolution. In this case, a resolution of 2290 by 1718. However, once I've put it through Lightroom's super resolution mode, I hope people have turned this into a drinking game, by the way, the amount of times I've said super resolution. And now you know that this video is definitely not sponsored. And if we look at the two photos again side by side, initially looking at them quite wide like this, can't really tell the difference massively between the two. And then actually when I look at the two photos side by side, I honestly can't tell a massive amount of difference, especially compared to some of the earlier photos, like with the seals. Obviously, there are also fine hairs all the way around the insect, but it just doesn't stand out as much as it did with the seal, that very stark difference we had between the two. Whether that's, I don't know, the humidity, whether that's the software, I don't fully know. But I do think that the noise looks a little bit smoother, interestingly. But otherwise, obviously the resolution has increased, and we've ended up with 4581 by 3436, which actually is enough to print out on the calendar. Would you do it? Is another question. For me, I think the interesting thing when it comes down to like iPhones and older tech generally, if you, I don't know, found an old camera from years ago, if you process through this super resolution, maybe you'd want to print it out to A4, but it would be more than enough to store on your phone. Absolutely fantastically, more than enough for that. And I think for the photos, which mean a lot, which is going to be different to everyone, just having access to this tool is going to be really, really useful to people. Because I think the interesting thing here is that the photos that you take on your old phones or say old digital cameras, I don't think they're often going to be the photos that you're going to be sticking up on the wall big. But I think these are probably going to be the photos which are going to go into family albums. But just having the opportunity to give them that little bit of extra detail is going to go an absolute mile. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button down below and subscribe if you'd like more videos just like this. It genuinely helps the channel out a whole bunch and lets me know what sort of things that people are interested in. And finally, thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.